So I think we can get started. It looks like
Okay.
people are starting to file into the Zoom. So if you'll allow me to kick everything off, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suda David Wilp, and I'm coming from you today from the German Marshall Fund of the United States office in Berlin. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress and the EU Former Members Association to this webinar. We're going to have a conversation with our former lawmakers for about 45 minutes and discuss takeaways from the series of elections that you've all witnessed last year. Everybody's calling it sort of the super election year. About half the globe went to the polls last year, and talk a little bit about the emerging political landscapes on both sides of the Atlantic. And then I'll open it up to questions from all of you. Please use your Q&A function, and colleagues at the Former Members Association will collect those questions and we'll get to them very shortly. But before I start asking questions of our esteemed panel, I want to give you all a brief introduction of our speakers. We have the Honorable Kathy Manning from the great state of North Carolina, who served in the U.S. Congress from 2021 to 2025 and was a member of the Education and Labor Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee. Her counterpart across the aisle is the Honorable Dennis Ross from the great state of Florida, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2011 to 2019 and was a member of the House Financial Services Committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Then we're really lucky to have two former parliamentarians from the EU Parliament. I'm pleased to introduce Professor Dr. Rodlieve Quisthut-Rowohl from Germany. She's sitting in Hanover today in between classes at the university. And during her tenure from 1989 to 2019, she was a member of the Committee on Energy, Research, and Industrial Policy, as well as the Committee on International Trade. Also with us is Ana Gomes from Portugal, who was a member of the European Parliament from 2004 until 2019. And she served on a variety of committees ranging from foreign affairs and development to civil liberties, justice, and home affairs. Thank you so much to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule for this very important conversation. As I mentioned to all of you while we were getting to know each other before starting the webinar, Germany's getting ready for an election here in about 3 weeks, and we're 1 week into the tenure or the second administration of President Donald Trump. So there's a lot to talk about, but maybe we can look back first of all. And how about I start with you, Ms. Gomez? So what do you think, why do you think there was such a move for sort of a mood of anti-incumbency on both sides of the Atlantic? That seemed very apparent to me when looking at the results of the EU parliamentary election, what we saw in France over the summer, and of course, what we saw in the US. Why do you think there is this mood of anti-incumbency, and what should mainstream parties be looking for? What's the message for mainstream parties? And then we'll go to a US lawmaker after that. Anna.
Well, my pleasure to be participating in this debate with our colleagues from the US and, of course, with Gottlieb. I'm going straight to your question. I think that it has a lot to do with the policies, some of our neoliberal policies that discarded the people. We did not see the impact in many people of policies that were driven by a mercantilism at the global level. And of course, all of that aggravated with the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic. It's very clear that in the US, despite the measure that were taken by the Biden administration with the IRA, the people still feel very much the impact of the inflation, and that's why they reacted as they reacted. I think this was more significant, the economic side, than the other aspects that have been often um, put forward, like the cultural wars and so on. I think it was basically for the feeling that the gap between the haves and the haves not has so much widened that has alienated a lot of people and has created this room in the US as well as in Europe for extreme right wing parties to thrive and to come with these very nasty agendas of putting in question all the democratic progress and all the rules in which that were commanding the rules-based world in which we wanted to live.
So, Congressman Ross, now in the United States, we have a two-party system, so it's different from, many Western democracies here in Europe where they have parliamentary systems. But is there also a mood, do you sense, in the last election cycle and even perhaps before that, in terms of anti-establishment sentiments that has been sort of taking root in the American political system?
Yes, I do. And incumbency used to have its advantages because of your position and your ability to raise dollars for reelection. But one thing that we've noticed in America is that according to a Pew Research poll done in April of 2024, confidence in the American government is down to an all-time low of 16%. That's the lowest it's been in 7 decades. In 1985, for example, it was at 42%. And when confidence in government is low, then trust is low, and the people are looking for an alternative. I think you'll see that despite increase in registrations of one party over another, the fastest growing registration in voters in the United States are non-party affiliates. And I think that this anti-incumbency, this anti-establishment is reflective of a lack of trust in government, and they're seeking to find some leadership. I think that the American people want to trust. There's no question in my mind they want leadership and they want to trust. But I think that over the last several decades, they've become disenfranchised and are now moving away from their parties and looking for more independent, more, lack of a better term, nationalistic ways of preserving what they think is rightfully theirs as a citizen. Now, I'll tell you, and I did a little research and saw that in the EU, that the trust in government there is high. It's at like 42%. But one of the priorities of the EU in their projections for 2025 is to restore trust within the public sphere. So I think we're all seeing this as a source of the symptom of anti-establishment and anti-incumbency. How we address it is going to be interesting.
Professor Roval, do you agree in the sense that, I think Dennis brought up a very good point about lack of trust. And in Germany, before many years, there's always a higher trust in government compared to counterparts in the US, but we're seeing even in, institutions like the Bundestag or the police or, journalists and media, for example, that the trust level is going down. Do you see this trend in Europe and in Germany as well?
Yes, sure. There is absolutely almost no trust in the government, and I I must say we have very strongly the impression that our government is more a group who tries to do something, who is learning to govern, but that they are not really leaders. On the other side, there is everywhere, almost everywhere in the EU, and as we know, so in the States also, a general dissatisfaction with the leaders. And so I don't see it, in fact, as a victory for the winner, but it is a defeat of the incumbent, which is not the same. The effect is the same, but the causes are not the same. And if we look, for example, at France, after the elections, the European elections last year, Macron was gambling. He's young, he wanted to make something, and he was gambling, and he lost. So it is not really a deep concerted change of views. It is more a response to certain moments in the life of the people. And there's another thing which I observe since, let's say, in the last years. That's the form of communication. It always goes faster. It is more aggressive. The people get very tired from a phase after a very short time. If we imagine in Germany, for example, Merkel stayed 16 years, Kohl stayed 16 years, Adenauer even more. That is in this actual communication with social media and in the society as we have it, not possible anymore. And I believe that, in fact, in my view, it is a very normal change which we observe. Anna spoke about the COVID and the change after the COVID crisis some years ago. But if we say we are living in society and in times of change, even in times of disruption, then it is completely normal that you don't stick to the same leaders you know already since years. I will not make an analysis about the election campaign of the Democrats, but in my view, and after 30 years of election campaigns in each kind of form, there were, of course, a lot of mistakes made, which is not, well, which is in a kind of general responsibility. So I have the impression that the Democrats made it after Biden left, made it easy for Trump.
Okay, so you left, you opened just the perfect
Well,
segue.
left, okay.
We didn't plan this.
Find another verb.
But now,
Okay, but he
so
really
I
left
still have
the
a question
scene.
for you, Congressman Kathy, to talk about the anti-incumbency sentiment, and maybe you could also tie that to Godliva's comments about the Democratic campaign, the campaign on the part of the Democrats. But yes,
happy to jump in.
An incumbent president.
Happy to jump in. First of all, I want to start by agreeing with my fellow panelists that there is low trust in government in the U.S. and around the world, as we're seeing. But I think we have to attribute it to a wide variety of reasons. Here in the U.S., the amount of money in our elections and the amount of dark money in the elections, as well as the world saw how much money one individual was able to put into the election for his candidate. That causes a lack of trust. Gerrymandering, which is an enormous problem. It's frankly why I'm no longer a member of Congress. That makes people think that their votes don't count and causes a mistrust of government. Changes in the media, which I believe was mentioned. We've had a cataclysmic shift in how people get their news. There no longer is a notion of fair and balanced. People get different facts, and frankly, social media algorithms continue to give them news that they already believe in. So that is a problem we have not learned how to deal with. However, with regard to an anti-incumbency election, I think it's an oversimplification to say that this was simply an anti-incumbency election, because I want to put the U.S. elections, the results into context. Donald Trump received 77 million votes. Kamala Harris received 75 million votes. That's a 2 million vote difference. Out of 152 million votes, about a 1.6% difference. So we all know that Donald Trump has said he's got an enormous mandate, but it shows that we are still a very divided country. I think it's important to recognize there were comments by one of my good panelists that Democrats made a lot of mistakes. I'm not going to disagree, but I think it's important to recognize that Kamala Harris only had 100 days to make her case. That is a very short runway by anybody's calculation. I think she did a great job in her big speeches. I think she was fantastic in the debate. She was not good in her interviews. But I can tell you from my personal experience, the more time you do interviews, particularly on a national stage, the better you get at it. And if she'd had a much longer runway, I think she would have gotten better in that one aspect of her campaign. And it also would have allowed people to get to know her and get to like her. I think it's important also to look at Congress. In the Senate, there were 3 Democratic losses, only one of which was actually a surprise. And that would be the Pennsylvania race. In the US House, there really wasn't much of a change. In fact, if we hadn't had the gerrymandering in my state of North Carolina, which knocked out 3 of us, made it impossible for us to run, if not for that gerrymandering, the Democrats would be in the majority in the House because more Democrats won in districts that Donald Trump won, I think 3 times as many as Republicans won in Biden districts. So I think it's important to put the US race into context. That being said, we've certainly had a dramatic shift in power. There were many who had a desire for change because of a variety of issues, some big issues that I think applied across the board. Some were smaller issues. I'm happy to talk about that. I think we're going to get to the specific issues later.
Yeah, actually, why don't we sort of begin, and we'll stay with you, Kathy, because sitting here in Europe, there's also a little bit of anxiety about the U.S. and Europe moving apart from each other, and we can discuss that as well. But from my vantage viewpoint, I feel like a lot of the issues that are top of mind for German voters coming up in the next 2 weeks, and then of course what I saw back home were very similar. So I'd be curious from all of you to hear what your point of view, like what were the main issues that drove voters on both sides of the Atlantic. Why don't we stick with you, Kathy, on this?
Okay, we'll happy to jump in. I'm going to focus on the issues in the U.S. I'll let my colleagues from Europe explain what they think the issues are. I think, first of all, I just think we have to remember that COVID was something unlike anything any of us have ever lived through, and it has a very long tail. That being said, it's been over for a while, and the U.S. had frankly, a remarkable economic recovery, in part because of what the Biden administration did, and certainly the first Trump administration threw a lot of money out there. The Biden administration threw a lot of money out there, and I think we can argue that perhaps there was too much money. But inflation, I would put that as the top issue. Gas prices came down. We were able to clear up some of the supply chains, but the two pieces of inflation that have been persistent are food and housing prices. Housing, we've had a shortage of housing since 2008 when so many construction industries shut down. So that's been building for a long time. But the food and the housing prices, those are the things that impact the average voter. And we talked about what the stock market is doing, but that's not what the average voter thinks about. And many of the steps that we took, particularly in the 117th Congress when Biden first took office, the infrastructure bill, the Chips and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, those put money into things, manufacturing, building, structural changes that take a long time to show results. And most people didn't feel those results. Second big issue that I would throw out there is immigration. This is a big problem worldwide, but I'll talk again about it in the US. This is an area where I think the Biden administration reacted quickly to some of the policies that were viewed as very cruel policies, separating children from parents. They put policies in place to rectify that, but I think they ignored the pent-up desire of people to migrate to the US after COVID. I think they reacted much too late to the dramatic increase in illegal migration. And that was exacerbated by things going on as a result of the war in Ukraine. The Republicans were very smart to focus on that issue. And Trump, frankly, made it worse by stopping bipartisan legislation in Congress that was the result of really tough negotiations. But we came up with a bill that would have put many of the much needed immigration reforms into law. On my side of the aisle, I'll say I was a part of a group that introduced an immigration bill called the Dignity Act. It was the first bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill to be introduced in many, many years. On my side of the aisle, there were a lot of people who just put the brakes on that legislation. I don't know whether it would have gotten much support from the Republicans because, frankly, I think they wanted to run on the problem, not solve it. Nevertheless, I was disappointed that we didn't get traction on solving some of our immigration problems because I think that would have made a difference. Third issue, crime. We need to do more to address crime. It involves, on our side of the ocean, mental health problems, but specifically our gun problems, the easy access to not just guns, but assault weapons. We passed a good bill in the 117th Congress, didn't do enough about it. Culture issues I would put as number 4. And there is a feeling that our traditional values are under assault. I think this may be also something that we see in Europe as well. On our side of the aisle, the issue that exemplified the culture war issues was the issue of trans girls in sports. A very small problem in terms of numbers, but an example of a culture issue that swayed voters. 2 more issues that I'll mention, and then I'll let my fellow panelists talk. One I would say is the rise of anti-Semitism. Huge problem. I think Democrats lost votes, even though Biden passed the first ever U.S. national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. But I think many Democrats failed to take a strong stand against the campus protests against the Hamas-Israel war. Now, people may say, well, but that affects a very small number of people, but it affected people in some of the swing states. And that leads right into the war in Gaza. And simply put, most Americans, if you look at the polling, are very strongly pro-Israel. I think the way Biden and Harris tried to be even-handed lost both Jewish votes and Muslim votes in some of those key swing states. So I'll stop there and let my colleagues jump in.
No, and since I just want to give everybody a chance, but I think it's important for you, Congressman Dennis, to also weigh in because I'm assuming that you probably agree with this list, but maybe interpret a little bit differently. I mean, how do you?
No, I don't disagree. I would just put it this way: that I think the primary one was domestic security that translates into strong borders, which is immigration, a robust economy in order to maintain inflation at good levels and be productive, increase our GDP, and third, I would say that our defense, investing in our defense, because of the Ukrainian subsidizations that the United States has been giving. I think it backlashed on a lot of the American people, especially when the economy isn't doing well. Why are we giving money away, even though it's a small fraction of what our overall appropriations are domestically? So in that regard, I agree. I think that security is country and that it does translate into threats that may come from a lack of energy production. It may come from investing way too much government money into our economic system, which increases inflation. And then, of course, the border issue. All those, I think, when coupled together, magnify themselves. And the American people said, we want to be safe and secure before we look at anybody else and what we can do for them. And until we're secure, we're not going to concern ourselves with what's happening internationally. So in that regard, I do agree with Congresswoman Manning. And we can go deeper. I think affordable housing still maintains a number one issue, but I'm not sure how we're going to address that yet.
Okay. No, great that you also weighed in. And before I jump over to this side of the Atlantic, I want to remind everybody to feel free to start posing questions or comments in the Q&A with the Q&A function, because Abigail at the Former Members is starting to collect those, and we'll get to those momentarily. But Anna and Koliva, obviously you come from very different regions of the European Union. And so does, the US is very diverse too, a very big country, but surprisingly, a lot of the issues I think that the congressman and congresswoman could agree on, but again, may be nuanced in their reasoning behind those issues. But, from your point of view, let's go to Godlieva first. Do you think in Germany some of these issues are also top of mind for voters?
Yes, of course, some of them surely. But I was for years and years member in the delegation for the relations with the US, and I worked a lot on TTIP and so on. And I have still the impression that there is, of course, a lot of diversity in the states, but that the public opinion in the different states of the European Union is even more diverse as in America. Well, the major topics changed, in fact, during the last year or the last 2 years. For example, I take now the case in Germany, but it's also the same in Austria, all in France, a little bit less maybe. But one of the main concerns of the first concern is the difficulties with the migration and the difficulties with the security in the public spaces. I don't know if you read it, but we have a lot of attacks, armed attacks with knives, with the fusil, and so on. And people don't feel safe when they go outside. Of course, you can say there is safety enough, but it's a feeling. And this feeling is very strongly at this moment, we are not safe in our own country. The second thing where the people don't feel safe either is the complete uncertainty in view of the future. The social systems in Europe, especially now in my case, the social system in Germany, are shortly before a complete collapse. It will be impossible to fund them. There must be a change in the old structure, but nobody can say very clearly so or so will be the change. The demography is not the best one, and that causes, well, in fact, a negative feeling, let's say it this way. They are completely uncertain what will be the future of the economy. We had a very tough policy for the protection of the climate, but this policy is, of course, also goes together with changes in the traditional industry in Germany, especially in the car industry. And that causes, again, a lot of uncertainty. There is no hope, there is no view in the future. What is not so a big issue is the public debt. The public debt is increasing from year to year, but that's something for the experts. And the climate policy lost a lot of importance. The people want to be just to have peace and to be calm and that everything goes as it was. But that is the thing which will not be possible, of course. Especially in Germany, there is a complete overregulation which hampers the industry very, very strongly. There is absolutely no hope that there will be a a progress or that there will be growth. And there is also an overrate wokeness. And that was also part, there is a gap between the leaders, the politicians, and the normal citizens. They really are speaking on complete different things. And a lot of Germans feel that a political group wants to regulate everything, even the most private life. At this moment, there is a wind of change, yes. But on the other side, which is absolutely not typical in Germany, is the fact that there are far more political parties as 4 or 5 years ago. So everybody is speaking more on which form of coalition can we make, or will we have after the elections, and there is less discussion about programs or about
And Gadiba, I definitely want to get to that with you about populist forces in Europe, because Germany obviously is contending with that issue right now. But I'd like for Ana Gomez to also discuss, because obviously, as we did a report at GMF on European competitiveness, and Berlin is in quite a different mood than some of the other capitals in Europe right now. I think that in Poland, for example, or Denmark, the mood is much more bullish about the economy. And I wonder if that's the same thing about Portugal. But nonetheless, what were our voters thinking? Do they have the same sort of anxiousness or anxiety about these issues as you've heard from your colleagues, Anna?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the impact of the disinformation that comes from the totally unregulated digital platforms that bring the news and the lies to the people are very much responsible for many of the wrong perceptions, be it that fuel this sense of insecurity, namely regarding migration in Europe, wherever. And which is actually used by the extreme right wing with an anti-democracy, anti-EU agenda. At the same time, we don't have, it's weird, it's paradoxical to say it, but we don't have the same anguish about the economy as Goodleaf just mentioned. That is the situation in Germany. On the contrary, we were in a good pattern now, in a good evolution. We are actually having a tremendous need of immigration, exactly to be able to fulfill the dynamic of our economy. But we see that, of course, the world around us is falling apart. We're not living anymore in a rules-based world. We are seeing the US under the Trump administration shattering the international order that has been built by the US, namely, very crucially, since the Second World War. I mean, completely shattering international law when it says it wants Canada, Panama, or Greenland. Of course, this is the perfect reason for Putin also to feel legitimized that he wants Ukraine, and what more in Europe. Or Xi Jinping wanting, I don't know, Taiwan, Japan, you name it. So it's a totally new world disorder we live in. And of course, we see the tremendous implications for also democracy at our national levels. I mean, we have Elon Musk with his Nazi salute, interfering in the German elections, participating in the conferences of the Nazi party AfD, in the same way as we indeed see the oligarchy of the tech bros that that was highlighted by President Biden. I'm afraid he saw it too late, because I was, during my 15 years in the European Parliament, always a member of the delegation with the US. We were always trying to call our American colleagues in Congress to work with us on regulating the digital platforms. Now, I mean, the problem is huge, because it's about actually AI and the destructive power on humanity, not just on democracy, on humanity that it has. We were trying to have joint regulation on cryptocurrencies. I mean, well, we know what this tariff war will bring. Will be much more inflation, namely on the poor ones who did not want inflation and voted for Trump because of that. It will bring much more, but it will. I mean, look at the mass that what's coming with the flourishing cryptocurrencies, namely those that President Trump himself and his wife are sponsoring. Totally lack of regulation, where we actually sought that earlier, and it should be jointly one. Taxation, another issue. I mean, it was the Biden administration that managed to negotiate at the level at OECD, something which what we in the EU had sought for a long time, which was indeed a level playing field in what concerns corporate taxation, gone now with President Trump. And of course, the implications also for our joint structures of security, NATO, are huge. We don't know if we have NATO when we have guys like Peter Hegseth and Steve Bannon and Grenell and so on, who have completely dismissed NATO. When the big test, the big political test is Ukraine. And Ukraine, it's not just about Ukraine, it's about Europe. It's about democracy and preserving our way of life in Europe. And if this is an area where we need to work together with the US. And if we're not going to work together, and I think Europe has a lot to blame itself, because of course we knew, even before the first Trump administration, that we have to do more in our part on defense, and that required indeed industrialization, including in an autonomous base for industrial and technological base for defense, not just for defense, but as well for defense. We'll have to do this investment now under the Trump pressure or not. We need to do it for our survival, for our defense. But it's going to be very difficult and in very strained conditions, especially when, of course, a crucial question that has been highlighted by Goodlieb is the question of energy. And we thought that energy obviously should not be developed in a way that would be incompatible with increasing the dangers for humanity of neglecting climate change. But that's exactly what we're going to have. And so it will be an absolute disaster. That's sad.
Okay, let's actually, Anna, there's a lot of questions in the queue, and I want to get to them in about 5 minutes. I just have one more question as the moderator before I get to everybody's questions in the Q&A function, and I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to give Congressman Ross a specific question about conservatism. I mean, Anna just brought up, the changes that we will probably start feeling on both sides of the Atlantic with President Trump back in office. But, there has been a shift toward the right in Europe and in the United States. But I'd love to hear your opinion on how conservatism has changed over the last decade or two, and then ask everybody on the panel about how populism is affecting the ability to legislate in democracies. And then I'm going to go straight to the questions. But Dennis, please, the floor is yours.
When I was in Congress, my first term, Numbers USA listed me as one of the top 5 conservatives in Congress. When I left, after 8 years, I was like 156. I didn't change, but the mood and the attitude of becoming more conservative, and had changed. We saw a move to the right, and our leadership wasn't moving that way. We had 8 years of the majority, and all we were able to get done is a tax reform package in December 2017 that was led by Donald Trump. We didn't address immigration. We didn't address the Affordable Care Act. We didn't address Dodd-Frank. We did a lot of things that we said we were going to do and campaigned on and didn't do it. I still feel myself as being a very conservative person, but I think what's happened is over the years is that we've seen this morph into policies of appeasement and acquiescence, and the result has been we can't do that anymore. Which is why I believe that Trump's the kind of negotiator that will go to the bargaining table, flip it upside down, but won't leave it. What we saw happen yesterday when he had 2 planes of immigrants going to Colombia, and Colombia said, don't bring him here. And he said, I'm giving a 25% tariff on you. And they said, we're going to go 25% tariffs on you. He said, I'll do 50%. And finally, Colombia says, okay, we'll take the immigrants back. Trump threatens to put tariffs on Canada. And suddenly the finance minister of Canada resigns, and now Trudeau says he's not going to run anymore. What we're seeing is that we're seeing somebody to come out and start calling bluffs, if you will. I don't think that Donald Trump will follow through on a lot of the things he says, but he's probably the only one who can get up there and say, I'm crazy enough to do this. And people start backing off and start renegotiating and reassessing where they are. So, and that has been as a result of, I think, of us moving more to the right in our political spectrum as Republicans here. And I would say that conservatism is becoming more of a popular mantra for the people to follow. And we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, we've got a lame duck president, and we'll see that, in 18 months, we've got another election. So, again, the beauty of our system is that we don't have an imperial presidency, but we do have a public that is swayed either through social media or for their own misunderstandings of how government works. And I think that's been a detriment to getting better leaders and more qualified leaders in place.
Congressman Manning, would you agree? I mean, sure, there's populist, wings of the Democratic Party as well, but just in general, legislating when, you've got populist media influencers, you've got, like you said, maybe young voters that are asking for things that are not, that maybe not transactional, but maybe more revolutionary. I mean, as a lawmaker, there's only so much that maybe you can deliver. How do you sort of contend with populist forces in democracies?
Oh, I think that it's a very difficult question. I will say, going back to what Congressman Ross said, I would agree that we've seen a real change of what conservatism is, because traditional conservatives wanted to cut government spending, eliminate government interference and regulations. They were traditionally very strong on defense and pro-free trade. And I think what we have now is what you have to call Trumpism, because in many respects, Trump is a moving target. I would agree that he has a unique way of negotiating. I just might want to say, Anna, I know you and I would be best friends if we were in Parliament together, because I just love what you said earlier. With regard to what Congressman Ross said about, he's the only guy who's going to get up there and threaten, I would remind everybody about the story of the boy who called wolf. And we need to be, there have been many other presidents who have stood very strongly for critically important issues. And John Kennedy did it. He learned the hard way, but he did it when he stood up to Russia the second time around, and was very successful. He did it without threatening and bullying. He did it in an appropriate, what I consider an appropriate way. Right now, with Trump, we don't know. He's causing great uncertainty and instability. And with regard to populism, I think he he's a moving target depending on what he hears or reads on X. And, he wants to cut taxes, but he wants to not just eliminate regulations, he wants to eliminate whole government departments. He recently came to North Carolina to look at the devastation that had been caused by Hurricane Helene and decided it was a good idea to eliminate FEMA. At a time when we are having worse disasters. I don't think the American people elected him, those 2 million vote difference. I don't think it was to get rid of disaster assistance. Perhaps it was to make disaster assistance more effective. I think the populist ideas that people thought he would represent, the jury's out. Is he going to actually do things that are going to help the people? If he puts all the tariffs in place, it's not going to bring down inflation. And that's what people were hoping he would do. If he starts wholesale cutting government departments, that is not going to make government more efficient. In fact, part of the problem that we have is we haven't invested in so many of our governmental departments by giving them, for example, something as simple as updated computer systems. So when you want your tax refunds back, there's an appropriate computer system that can help people get the work done. So I think there's a lot to be said about whether the populist notions that people found so appealing in Donald Trump, will he actually follow through on these things, or will he take his signals from the tech bros who have already started to clash with the MAGA wing of his government? We've got instead of free trade, which was traditionally a conservative value, we now have protectionism, but not based on a strategy, just based on who's gotten his ear most recently and who his friends are. So I think last thing I will say with regard to populist forces and how that affects our abilities to legislate in democracies, gerrymandering gets in the way because it prohibits good legislators from meeting in the middle. Because if you have to represent a district that has a broad mix of voters, you're going to find the common denominator. If you are representing a district that's been drawn to favor your party, you're going to go to the extremes. And right now, there are lots of extremes on the Democratic side, but they are not in control of the party. I think the same is not true on the other side. I think that the extremes on the right have outsized control and outsized influence in the party. And we saw that, and we're going to continue to see that, particularly with regard to the isolationist views that seem to be growing.
Thank you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start combining the questions now with the initial question, and I'm going to go to Godliva because it relates. The question that I have from the audience is, what would be the best ways for politicians and leaders to regain people's trust in government? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the CDU. I'm assuming that you are conservative, the EPP member, right, in the European Parliament. So tell us what you think, how the CDU, talking about conservatism, how can the CDU regain trust among German voters? And how does that tie into populism because of a very, sort of growing, being overshadowed by the AfD, or the AfD, the right-wing party, at the heels of the CDU? So how can Friedrich Merz and the conservatives regain trust in government? And then I'm going to go to Anna about populism and the future of democracy in
Europe. Yeah, it's difficult to answer all these questions shortly, but we must accept that democracy is a very difficult form of government and of society. It's the best form, but it is difficult. And how can we, or in general, the politicians, the parties, how can they regain confidence from the voters? Maybe by listening to the problems of the voters and to the problems of the normal, average people on the street. when you look it from, let's say, a more scientific point of view, you really have the impression that most of the leaders are talking somewhere in their bubble. Everybody speaks also always about the Brussels bubble. The Brussels bubble is not there where the people have concerns. So we have to go to the voters and to listen to their message. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, of course, there is more conservatism now as some years ago, but on the other side, democracy lives from the change. We had years and years of more left-wing governments. Now we have more right-wing governments in Europe. I believe that it's just the other side of the pendulum. Very important is the question of communication. Not only I have to listen to voters, I have also the duty to communicate where are the problem, which solutions will I try to give with my party if I'm elected, and so on. For what topics can you expect a majority when you vote for me or for my party? And I have the impression that the citizens don't trust the politicians. They say they are two different messages, to one for the elections and to one after the elections. And as long as that is our reputation, then we will always have more extremism, because so simply as they express themselves, no traditional party can do it.
Thank you, Godlieva. Anna, why don't we go to one of the other questions about the future of democracy in Europe? You know, skepticism about Europe has always been present among the EU member states. But how is this, the new EU Commission and the Parliament, how do you think it can present itself to show national voters across Europe that the EU is an institution for democracy?
Well, yes, indeed. The Euroscepticism was at the basis, for instance, of Brexit, and see how the British people are regretting it and realizing how they are much weaker now. And we see already where we are going back to work together, for instance, on the defense of Ukraine. I think that, in a way, Trump has nothing to do with conservatism, not the way Dennis has described it as traditionalists. It's actually disruption. But it is a disruption that will have its limits, as he has also highlighted, because it's 18 months till the next by-elections in Congress. I think he has to do as much evil as he can now, but it will be in decline, and people will be realizing. I think the impact in Europe is immense, because in a way he's wakening us, wakening us up to do what we need to do. Many were in denial in the EU that we had to do our part in defense. And we can only achieve it if we work together in the European framework. It can't be one by one national level. It will have to be a joint effort. And we were already demonstrating, now reacting to the pandemics, how we can indeed make a joint effort to deal with what are our needs, namely in terms of investment for the purpose of indeed building a Europe of defense. I only hope. So I think this will happen at the European level. Of course, we need leadership, and it's a big problem to have Germany and France in this moment so disconnected from reality and so and disconnected among within each other, because of course France and Germany were always the central axis of European democracy. But I hope if we give particular attention to this question of disinformation, and indeed perceive it as indeed a crucial element in fighting the hybrid war we are facing. I mean, the war in Ukraine is putting us all in front of a hybrid war. I mean, we're seeing they cutting cables for internet among, for instance, the Baltic countries and other European countries. We see the potential for indeed many other cables to be disconnected, and we have to face it and to prevent it and to fight that. At the same time, we have to fight against this disinformation that is poisoning our people and therefore poisoning democracy. We need strong leadership. At this moment, it's hard to see it, but we are starting to see it. For instance, quite relevant what Poland in this moment and under the leadership of Donald Tusk is meaning for Europe. And maybe, yeah, these are changing times, but I still feel confident, and I believe that these are also times where we, Democrats in the EU and Democrats in the US, need to work together more than ever.
So you mentioned Ukraine as being, the greatest challenge right now for European security architecture and also a test for democracy. So this question goes to our American lawmakers. Do you think U.S. voters and U.S. policymakers see Ukraine in a larger theater and in terms of sort of being part of an axis of upheaval among Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran? Congressman and a congresswoman, I'd love for you to share your thoughts on that. Maybe we'll go to you first, Kathy, and then Dennis.
So I will say on my side of the aisle, there was very, very strong support for Ukraine and support for the fact that under Biden's leadership, NATO was both strengthened and expanded. It now has 2 more members than it had before Biden took office. And that is very significant. That was not the outcome that Putin expected, I think, when he decided to allow his troops to invade the sovereign country of Ukraine. There has been very strong support among Democrats for Ukraine, and it is viewed in the larger context of if Ukraine falls. Next are our NATO allies. And for anyone who has studied history, when autocrats take over, they don't stop. And it does appear that Putin wants to recreate the former Soviet Union, and that will not stop at the borders of Ukraine. And what my good fellow panelist Anna said about the others who are watching, Xi Jinping, he's made it quite clear what his intention is. He wants China to be the world leader, and he intends to take back Taiwan, which he considers a part of Greater China. And he's looking at all the signals to see how strongly will we in America stand with our democratic allies. So on my side of the aisle, I do see great support for Ukraine. Now, on the other side of the aisle, I sat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I worked with many Republicans who were very strongly in support of helping Ukraine. And we worked together very well on that issue. But as I said just a few minutes ago, it's the far right part of the party that is becoming much more isolationist, does not view what happened historically as something that we should learn from. And I think that's going to be a big problem. What Trump decides on this issue, he has just said the war needs to stop. It's happened long enough. Who knows what that means? So I'll turn it over to my...
Yeah. Dennis, what do you think? And do you think your Republican colleagues, your peers, see the interconnectedness with China, Iran, and North Korea when it comes to looking at Ukraine?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's no question about it. There is a situation going on now that didn't exist 4 years ago. It does have a nexus to energy production. America was number one energy producer under Trump, and that was curtailed significantly under the Biden administration, which even gave more empowerment to Putin to be able to control the energy in Eastern Europe. We saw the president of Poland come back yesterday and said, no, I don't want Nord Stream 2 to open up because we don't want to see that dependency on Russian energy. And I think that if we can get a market influence into the energy production in Eastern and Central Europe, we're going to have more of an impact on reducing the conflict in Ukraine. I also think that watching the Russian military come across the border empowers Xi Jinping to say, look, the United States can't decide whether they want to support Ukraine or not, and let's go ahead and let's see what happens if we take over Taiwan and try to regain that. I think that this is a time where, again, as I said before, that policies of appeasement and acquiescence are not going to work for the American people. I think that the best way to seek peace is to prepare for war, and that's where we as a nation have got to come to terms with our spending, because we're spending more on interest than we are in defense, and defense is has been our number one appropriation. So it's a dichotomy for us in America to have to deal with. But watching the influences of Putin, of Xi Jinping, and of Kim Jong-un, it has got to put us in a situation where we have to negotiate something. I don't see an end to the Ukraine war without a negotiated ceasefire or peace deal. And that's not going to please a lot of people, but it might be able to put us in a position where we can get some stability in Eastern Europe and allow for opening up other markets of yes, I believe, free markets of energy and agricultural products. But it's, it is a disruptive time right now, and I'm curious to see how it plays out.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question too for our two former EU lawmakers. Why don't I go to Anna first this time? So do you see, the second administration of the Trump administration or President Trump being more of a trend in American politics? Because many people in Europe, I think, in 2016, when he was elected, saw it as a bit of an anomaly or an aberration in American politics. Is this permanent and a broader reflection of American society, the re-election of Donald Trump? What do you think, Anna and Godliebe?
No, I don't think this is permanent. I want to believe it's an aberration, even worse than the first term. But it depends on us all, the capacity to persuade our citizens that indeed this is aberrant and this is against civilization and this is against progress. I mean, denying science, going back into energy drill baby drill policy, which is totally about to destroy the planet, because it will only send more carbon emissions and therefore counter what we should be doing to address climate change. I would rather actually go for an energy policy that, in that maybe the Chinese were very smart. They moved into exploiting renewables, exploiting EV cars, and if we would follow the same example in Europe and in US, we could be much better. And it could be much more sustainable in terms of addressing also the climate change, and even more profitable for all of us. So I hope that indeed the Trump 2 administration will be an aberration, and that the American people, with their reactions already, for instance, going to court to counter the executive order that puts in question the nationality of the children born in the US, and so on, will exactly show that this is an aberration. This is against the interests of the US. This will be a ruin for the American people, namely for those who voted for Trump. And I think very soon people will learn.
Anna and Godliebe, rather than focusing on the domestic politics, what about the transatlantic relationship? I mean, wouldn't you think that things are not necessarily going to go back to the way they once were, right? I mean, this may also signify a shift in America's not reliability, but sort of its, bond with Europe is changing, and that's a
Yes,
reflection with Trump's
that,
reelection. Would you
that,
agree? And Gottlieb, I'd love to hear your opinion too.
definitely. I think when we talk about our strategic autonomy, it's in defense, of course, but it's much more than defense. It's for instance, on energy and so on. And yes, that's why I said that in a way, the Trump administration unintendedly will waken us up. I hope Europe. It will be difficult in the beginning because, of course, also Trump will use the salami tactics of trying to divide us, and God knows how we are easily divisible. But I hope that in the end, those who see the need to move forward together will move forward together. And we have the instruments, the institutional instruments for that. We have the so-called reinforced cooperation and the treaties that allow us to move forward and leave behind those who don't want to move in the right direction. So I hope this will waken us up. But that's why I at the same time, I sense that it is important to keep the contacts at the civil society level, institutions, academic world, and business and so on, because I don't want us to disconnect. We have many things different, but we have very important common values, those that enabled us to build the international system of rules-based world that we need to make more efficient. And I don't want to scrap it. I don't want I want to save it and to make it more efficient. And therefore, I believe that the EU and the US public opinion need to work together, and civil institutions need to work together, and can't allow the Trump administration and their tech bros to indeed poison us all.
So thank you very much. And Rodliva, maybe you can talk a little bit about Germany specifically, because the rest of Europe, of course, is probably been the most nervous about the return of President Donald Trump, but certainly Germany has a lot at stake because this country is very much dependent on the US security guarantee. So what do you think about the return of Donald Trump? Do you see this as a change in direction when it comes to the transatlantic relationship, or do you see this as an opportunity for Europe to be also more capable on the world stage?
Well, the first thing is, of course, Germany is very dependent from the United States, but the opposite is also true. So between the States and the EU, there is a very strong interdependency. And that's why I am, from time to time, very astonished that there are so strong messages from both sides of the Atlantic, what we will change and what we don't want to do. But if I try to be realistic, I believe that the EU and Germany is part of the EU, even if it's the biggest state. But the EU has to make a lot of homework. And the best thing with the election of Trump, I believe somebody said it already, is that the EU realizes we have to do homework. That's the first thing. On the other side, also in the States, it is not possible for a president, even if he has a lot of power in his hands, to make exactly what he wants at the moment he wants. There is also a system of check and balances. And if Europe and the EU, on a very factual basis, restart to cooperate, restart to discuss about new treaties for example, energy and other products, for tariffs or for non-tariffs, we can make a lot of progress. I believe that it is, in fact, in this disrupted world, a good thing if we forget the idealism of years ago, and if we start step by step, but very precisely and with an open mind for the view of the others, to restart cooperation. And from time to time, I have the impression when I listened to Trump that he will have to abandon his illusions. At the end, the States and Europe are more intertwined as he wants to have it. And even a very strong state cannot rule the world. So I am not so pessimistic, but I see more as a transformation. I really observe a disruption in the established world.
So we have about like 15 minutes left. I have one question here on sort of interaction and rhetoric when it comes to engaging voters. All of you have the advantage of now being outside of office, and hindsight is 2020. So if you look back, how would you advise, current politicians that are trying to, sort of gain traction above the noise when it comes to social media and hate speech, and also the emotionalization of politics is what this question asks. How do you build rational arguments to engage voters? Why don't we start with you, Congressman Ross, and then I will ask a European member to also weigh in.
One of the things I would say, a little bit of advice, is never say never. One of the things I found, and it happened in my party, is that people would take a position and say, I will never do something. And they find themselves boxed into a corner, and now they can't come back. And they have to be very difficult, because it's sometimes, there's a book by Adam Grant called, what is it, about changing your mind. Think Again is the name of the book. And it says, look, you need to reconsider sometimes your thoughts and be able to think again and maybe change your mind in order to adapt. Politicians have a tendency, because they're so determined to get a vote, that they will say whatever commitment is necessary to do that. And I think that boxes them in a corner. I think that takes the process and stalls it a little bit. The other thing I would say is transcend the middle. In addition to never saying never, transcend the middle. Again, one of the fastest growing registrations in this country is non-party affiliate. And all that's going to do is lead to more extremes on either side of the aisle. And that's not healthy for the system. And it's not representative of the bulk of America. So being able to not give up your principles, not compromise your values, but being able to transcend the middle. I think Anna said it very well earlier. We have so much more in common than we do in difference. Having been married for 41 consecutive years, it's been a tough one. We got to give and take in our relationships. And politicians have to be able to lead with the understanding and with the express position that I've got to be able to work things out, because ultimately what you're doing is you're building the relationship. I would love to go out and we probably disagree on a lot of things, but I would still enjoy going out and having dinner to find out more about each of you individually. Politicians need to be doing that. They need to be building the relationships, because whomever may be your adversary today may need to be your advocate tomorrow. And you don't want to use character assassination in order to ruin the resolution that is best for our cause or our nation.
Thank you. That was a great list. And Anna, why don't we go to you, because you spoke very eloquently about, misinformation and disinformation. How do you think your colleagues that are sitting in Parliament right now can sort of have their voice heard above, above the fake news and the hate speech that's out there?
Well, I very much agree with what Denise has said. And I believe that, yes, it's crucial that politicians be able to listen to people, listen to what the concerns of the grassroots is, and the experts at different levels, but then do not fail to lead. They're supposed to lead and not just follow the focus groups or the polls or whatever. Lead is set the direction. And yes, this might require adjustments. We are now in Portugal celebrating 50 years of democracy. We lived in dictatorship. I lived 20 years of my life in dictatorship. I know what is to live in dictatorship. I don't want us to go back. We know we don't want to go back into dictatorship. And therefore, to preserve democracy, it has to function and it has to deliver to the people. A democracy that is, I think we adopted policies on the economic level that have indeed disenfranchised a lot of people from democracy. People who did not see their life improve or the life of their children improve as their lives improved. That's what we are experimenting today in many places in Europe. And we need to make sure that indeed democracy goes together with progress and growth and prosperity for all, for a majority, for a middle class. If we weaken the middle class and make the rich ultra rich and the poor feeling left out, we are weakening democracy. So this must be a crucial question. And this was neglected in the last decades in the US as much as in Europe. It was not recently that the oligarchy of the tech bros and the oligarchies developed. I was struck all the time that I was going to the US to see how much congressmen were depending on this wretched system where you actually have to be always campaigning for financing and dependent on the super PACs and things like that. This destroys democracy. And it's not by chance that in the US, as well as much as in Europe, the populists use the flag of fighting corruption when they are often the product of corruption themselves. So this is something where we must absolutely pay attention if we want leaderships that are strong and that indeed will preserve democracy as an essential part of our way of life. And I mean democracy at the national level, at the European level, but also at global level. That's what a rules-based world is. If we don't have a world that is based in rules and the rule of law, then we won't save democracy anywhere.
Thank you, Anna. So just quickly, Congressman Manning, in the world of sound bites and viral videos, how do you present rational arguments to voters?
Well, one thing I want to mention, when you talk about voters and how we communicate with voters, polls show that although people don't trust and don't like Congress, they actually really like their congressperson. And the reason for that is if you're a good congressperson, you're doing your job, you are getting out into your community during we usually are in Congress 3 weeks a month and then home for a week. And if you're doing your job, you are getting out into your community and you're meeting with people and you're listening to people, you're talking with them, you're having roundtables or town halls so that you communicate you listen to them, and then you take their ideas and their thoughts back to Washington and try to implement the policies or vote in ways that will reflect what the values of your constituents are. And in fact, I decided early on that when it came to doing news interviews, I was going to focus on local news in my district, not so much national news, because I wanted my voters and my constituents to hear from me on a regular basis. And if you think about talking to your constituents and not getting that clip on the national news, I think you can be more effective in how you speak and how you represent the district that you're sent to Congress to represent.
Excellent. So, Godlieva, I'm going to let you answer that question too, but also start with my last question for the panelists. If you can say in one sentence, first, let's answer the question about, engaging voters, but sort of what Anna talked about delivering democracies. In one sentence, how do you think how we can make our democracies more resilient? And I'm going to ask that question to everybody before we close.
Okay, everybody said the same. Listen to the people. Anna said we need real leadership, but I believe also that a leader needs a vision for the future. And at the time, it is a time in changing, and we need this vision. But I have some concerns about not so much about conservatism or so, but about populism. And then you see that at the right and on the left, and it is a very narrow ridge between listen to the people and speak with the people without getting so simplistic that you are populist. And I have the impression at this moment that democracy is 2 steps forwards and 1 step on the other side, and that we will have to change, and we will change, but it will take a very long time, because the younger people who come after us, we are all retired, and we speak about a society we knew and we worked for. When I see my 13 grandchildren, they are different, and they will act differently, and they will shape the democracy differently too. So I have more questions at this moment as answers.
So we'll have to come back and have another panel discussion, but
Yeah, exactly.
we will have to have a part 2 of this discussion. But maybe why don't I move on to Congresswoman Manning? If you could just sort of, if you could leave like looking back, how do you think we can make or actually looking forward, how can we make our democracies more resilient?
A couple of things. Number one, I think we have to start with education. We need to improve the way civics are taught. Civics is taught to our K through 12 schools, our college students, and frankly, we need remedial courses for the rest of the population, because many people do not, and particularly even some of my colleagues from the House, they don't understand how our government is supposed to work. They don't understand what separation of powers means. They don't understand what our Bill of Rights guarantees. They don't understand what freedom of and freedom from religion is. They don't understand what the Emoluments Clause meant. They don't understand what the right to vote means. So education, that's number one. Number two, as I've said over and over, we have not figured out how to get out messages and truth in this new news and social media environment. I have 2 thoughts on how we do that. Number one, going back to education, we have to teach people to be more critical consumers of information. If it sounds too ridiculous to be true, it probably is not true. Second of all, I think we need to give responsibility to the social media platforms. One of our Meta has just decided they're no longer going to be fact checkers. Well, great. Then let's take away their protection from lawsuits. If we take away their protection from lawsuits, they'll figure out very quickly how to get rid of dangerous misinformation from their sites. Last thing, I think we are going to have to depend on the states. There are a lot of states out there that are fighting back, a lot of state attorney generals that are going to push back against abuses. There's more to our system than just a president. And there's also more to our system than just a Congress that is crippled with indecision right now. We have a whole system of states, and states have their own governments and their own attorney generals. And I think we will see some fight for our values and our democracy coming out of the states.
Thank you for those very constructive comments. Anna, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to give Dennis the last word. Go ahead, Anna.
Well, I very much agree that education with this particular focus on improving citizenship and the critical consumer of information is essential, but does not prevent that we try to indeed regulate the digital platforms, make them responsible. And of course, the challenge now is even bigger with AI. I don't expect that we do this now with the Trump administration, so at the transatlantic level, but at least at the EU level, we should do that. We should continue. And of course, the question is being efficient regulation. It's not easy. It's not an easy work, but it has to be done. Then all the questions concerning the crypto regulation, we cannot, this completely, we were already living in since the big mistake was made by President Clinton of annulling the Glass-Steagall Act. We have been living in the financialized economy, which is very much responsible for this messy evolution. This is getting messier with the crypto, and we absolutely need regulation on that. And then I would say at the European level, we need as well to assume that the question of taxation is not just national policy. It has a European angle. It needs regulation, because otherwise we're not working for our internal market. We are undermining it, since there is a disloyal competition, not having a level playing field in the field of taxation. Eventually, this will be a matter as well for some transatlantic and even behind work. But for the time being, I guess this is expecting too much.
Very good. Congressman Ross, how can we make our democracies more resilient?
I have to agree with both Kathy and Anna. You know, it is foremost an education of our political system that has to be instilled not only K through 12, not only in higher education, but also in our communities. We need to be encouraging citizen participation and understanding of this political process, because the individual does make a difference. And the more we encourage them, the better we will be. And more importantly, we will build statesman leaders. And we need statesman leaders if we're going to have a resilient democracy.
Excellent. Pithy and also hopeful. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. It was a great panel. And like Oliva said, maybe we'll have to have a return and an assessment in 6 months or a year. Have a great start to your week. Thank you to the former Members Association in DC and the former Members Association in Brussels, and all of you for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.